exactly. So why don't we jump into this discussion now? Because while Wes Anderson uh, made a film that you and I both enjoyed, there's been a lot of talk about the role that Japanese culture plays into the movie. Why don't you give us a little breakdown of what people have been having issues with that?
Yeah, so a lot of people, I mean, this is definitely an observation that was coming from critics of color that are, I think, naturally just more adept to see these problems, right away.
Mhm.
But a lot of people, and it is also coming from Asian Americans specifically watching the movie here in America. But the general gist of it is that Isle of Dogs really doesn't require the story does not require itself to be set in Japan. It's kind of just set in Japan because Wes Anderson is a big fan of Japanese cinema. He's
Mhm.
openly talked about his love of Miyazaki and Kurosawa. Um, and this is kind of his in his mind, this is a homage to that, right? But
Mhm.
the critiques that which I do think there's a lot of merit to what these are saying, but the mileage of whether that impacts your enjoyment in the movie really depends on the person, I guess. But you know, it's kind of like cultural tourism in the sense that it's just kind of going to Japan, and this again, it's a fictional version of Japan. Nagasaki City is not a real place, of course, and it's sent
Right.
20 years in the future, as Courtney B. Vance told us. But um, the dogs, and they give you this with text in the beginning. The dogs speak dog; they're barking,
Yeah.
but for our viewing pleasure, it's being automatically transcribed into English.
Mhm.
But there's no subtitles for the Japanese speakers. There's only a translation when it's convenient, when there's a TV translator there, giving it to us in English, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of where a lot of it's coming into, where the Japanese people are kind of the sideshow in their own story.
Right.
And yes, you could retort, but it's just dogs, but it's dogs voiced by white people, right?
Mhm.
And it's I it's tough because it, it's really is hard too because Asian cultures have long been stereotypes in Hollywood. Um, watch a movie like 16 Candles. There's
Yeah.
just characters that are just blatant stereotypes, and it's played for laughs. And the fetishization of Asian culture in this case, where Wes Anderson clearly doesn't mean anything bad by this.
Mhm.
And I think the people that are being, more kind to him are just saying that, just being tone deaf about how this would go and make people feel.
Right.
It's not an obvious blatant ripping off. It's not a cultural appropriation, right?
Yep.
In that sense, it's just kind of him not understanding the issues with it. But I saw a quote, or rather a long tweet from someone who just not a verified account or anything, just a Asian American guy who saw the movie, and he saw it at the ArcLight in LA, right?
Mhm.
And he said, I expected the movie to love Japan and hate Japanese people. That's just how artsy white men operate. And I'm like, all right, that kind of makes sense. And the hipster uh, critique that's always lobbed at Wes Anderson, hipster culture has long been criticized for just kind of taking things from other people and just using it
Right.
and right.
Yeah.
But the next part of his quote, I did not expect to hear roaring laughter to the equivalent of a ching chong joke. I did not expect snickering during regular Japanese conversation, yet there it was. And I do think that the Japanese language is kind of played for laughs at point because we don't get the translation. And,
Mm.
there's a lot there. I don't think it's totally baseless.
No, yeah, I don't think it's baseless. I think I it's hard for me to remember. I don't remember any times I laughed at like the language, but I remember times when they wouldn't translate, but something would be happening in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things Wes Anderson does a lot is that when someone's talking, it's not just like they're talking. There are things happening around them, like the Atari could have been giving a monologue, and one of the dogs is like I don't know, like scratching itself or like sneezing or something like that, and I think at that point it can become a little muddy. But I think definitely another thing that we talk about people getting these roles like Yoko Ono is I think a great casting because that's an Asian person, Asian American now, who is filling one of these roles and did greatly. And Atari's character is a Japanese actor, and I believe the person who played the mayor and the person who played like the news person on TV was also Japanese. But yeah, the dog rules were played by all white Americans except for Courtney B. Vance.
Right.
And it is problematic to be representing this culture, but not necessarily having actors who are also doing that. Although it makes me feel better. Wes Anderson did have a Japanese person writing this with him and working
Right.
on the dialogue and trying to get most of that right. Um, I actually thought Tracy's character was a little bit more egregious, and the role that she played in the movie, in terms of going against culture. So Tracy is this. For those who haven't seen the movie, she's this senior in high school. She's a study abroad student from Cincinnati, Ohio, who basically at the end, like, puts together the whole conspiracy against killing the dogs and saves the dogs in a way.
She's literally a white savior.
Yeah, I mean,
saving the foreigners. Like,
yeah,
she's Matt Damon in The Great Wall.
yeah, and the thing is, and I've said I'm not a huge anime culture person, but in doing some reading around this, it's my understanding that like her character is something that is portrayed a lot in anime culture, which is like this brash, outspoken, American study abroad student or American who's in the story. But being the actual savior of it is definitely problematic, especially because I think there's a case to be made that you could have written her character out completely.
Yeah.
So
it really hurts Atari. Like, Atari kind of takes
Right.
the back seat in the second half of the movie, and as the main non-dog lead initially, it's an interesting choice.
Yeah, and especially because they kind of framed it as Atari was second coming of this great Japanese myth about the boy who saved the dogs in the beginning, and then you have the American white female save. It just felt like you had it all right there already. Like, you didn't necessarily need to have this happen, but it's not perfect, and I think this is a problem that isn't going to be solved anytime soon. But I think just the fact that there were steps taken in this movie to try to be respectful of the culture, to try to make the dialogue correct. From what I read, the dialogue is close, if choppy at points, but it's close to what's actually, like, it makes sense. So that's good. And it's not just like they're throwing like gibberish words or throwing gibberish sentences together. So Wes Anderson got to be a little bit better there, but I'm not gonna knock him too much. I think it's admirable that he tries to explore these cultures, although it needs to get a little bit better about how he does it moving forward.